You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Well, this is a very special edition of Toronto Sports Rush, as I'm Julie Stewart-Binks here, joined by the one and only ESPN and hockey legend, Craig Wyshynski, joining us on the show. You have so many illustrious awards and stops along your career. I don't even know them all, but I just know that you are one of the best to cover hockey. So, Greg, thanks for joining us today.
I appreciate that. I mean, we could have summarized that by saying internet old Craig Wyshynski has joined us here on the show. But no, that's lovely for you to say. And I'm just happy that people still like the things I make.
Yeah, you make hockey fun. You make it you know where to find the joke even when there isn't one. And it's great. And I love your content. And it's something that we need in the sport. So speaking of that, we, of course, talk a lot about the Toronto Maple Leafs, which I know you are probably very excited to talk about because they are what? The center of the universe. And the Toronto Maple Leafs right now are currently on the ice in morning skate, preparing for a potential playoff matchup, or at least the vibes are right now, against Florida Panthers, who are coming off of a overtime loss to the Montreal Canadiens. When you just let's just look at this game right now and where both teams are. Like, how would you describe maybe who's got the zhuzh right now? Who's rocking and rolling in your mind?
I think Toronto's got the zhuzh because I feel like they know that their best path to finally advancing to a championship round in the Austin Matthews era is to have the Tampa Bay Lightning and Florida Panthers devour themselves in their own series while the Maple Leafs go and play Ottawa. And now Ottawa's not going to be an easy out by any stretch. I mean, I remember talking to Brady Tkachuk earlier this season about the idea of how much that series would mean to the Senators, how much that series would mean to the city of Ottawa to take out the Leafs in the Battle of Ontario. Not saying it's an easier series. I'm simply saying that the Ottawa Senators do not have Nikita Kucherov. They do not have Andrei Vasilevsky. They do not have the other Tkachuk. They do not have Barkov and now Marchand. They don't have any of that stuff. And Tampa and Florida do. So as we try to figure out how best to plan the parade, the first step of that parade has to be to avoid the Floridian teams in the first round, let one of them take out the other, and then hope for the best in the second round if you're the Leafs. And so if you're asking me who's got the zhuzh, who's got the drive, who's got the carrot in front of them, I think it's Toronto, because I think they know that their playoff fate probably hinges on getting away from Tampa and Florida in the first round.
Right. I mean, that's such a great way to summarize everything with it. And with them playing Ottawa first and foremost, I know it would be those people in Ottawa just hate Toronto so much. And I say that coming from a place of having dated a guy who lives still in Carp, Ontario, which is right near Canada, which is right near where the Sens play. And man, that nearly ended our relationship. Was just that I was a Leafs fan, not anymore. I'm an unbiased journalist.
Sure you are.
And then obviously he was a Sens fan. And so that was the biggest issue in our relationship. Well, however,
two things real quick. First of all, the Toronto-Ottawa rivalry always reminds me of the Don Draper meme from Mad Men, where he's getting yelled at in the elevator and he's just I don't even think of you. That's Toronto to Ottawa most times for me. And the second thing for me is I know you've tried to shake off your Leafs fandom, and maybe you have. Maybe you've become the most impartial of impartial journalists. But I've often thought about this with all of the friends that we have in the press box that grew up in Ontario and grew up as Leafs fans. And I thought to myself, if and when they play for the cup, and it's they're winning in the third period, and they've got a chance to hoist it that night, I imagine it's going to look a lot more like the Olympics. I think it's going to look a lot more like absolute partisan, the tears of a young child clutching their Maple Leafs teddy bear kind of feelings come out in the press box as the seconds count down and Toronto wins for the first time since 1967. I feel like everyone in the press box will revert to their fandom pretty damn quickly if the Leafs have a chance to win the Cup.
That was so on point and something I've never even thought of. And that scenario 100% would happen because so most of the Toronto media grew up in Toronto as a Leafs fan. Yeah. And so that is in their DNA. That's why they got into the business pretty much. And so then that would happen 100%. I remember being in the press box of the Women's World Cup with USA taking on Japan in Vancouver. And I remember some of my former colleagues just jumping up and down with USA. And I remember another person from a Canadian network just looking at me like, isn't there no cheering in the press box? Like, didn't we agree to that? Like, but then it just goes all out the window, which I believe would probably happen if the Leafs did win it. It would be absolute mayhem for a lot of these journalists. And I will say, like, I talked to this with Nate Thompson on just another show that we do. And I said, like, when I covered the Anaheim Ducks, like, we wanted the Ducks to win. Like, when they played the Leafs, I just said, like, I do not want to have to pretend to be sad on a plane home with Randy Carlyle, because they would just be like, so if they lost, everyone would be so sad. And we had to pretend to be sad, right? Like, and I remember New Year's Eve going from Edmonton to Vancouver, we celebrated the new year on the plane, but they had lost in Edmonton. And we didn't celebrate it. We were just like, I guess it's the next year right now. Like, no one could smile. Yeah. So in that regard, I learned how to, like, not care about the Leafs. I was just like, if the Ducks win, that's all I care about. Ducks win. And whatever. I didn't have, like, a connection to the Anaheim Ducks.
We've talked about this before, about the idea that, like, being honest with your fandom has become something that's a little bit more accepted now than it was like when I first started. Like, when I first started at Puck Daddy and I was open about being a Devils fan, I was doing it because I didn't want there to be a constant array of gotchas. Oh, look at him. Here's him in a Devils hat. Like, yeah, no kidding. I grew up a Devils fan. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. I still root for the team. My kid's a Devils fan. Like, what am I going to do? And now I think it's become more safe for like someone like Mina Kimes to be like, I'm a Seattle Seahawks fan, but I also cover the NFL, right? Like, it's become a safe territory to be more open about that stuff. And so I say that because I do think that, you know, we all have our teams where it's going to hit us in the feels if they win a championship. And so I think about the Leafs and I think about all of our friends and you and everybody and what that's going to feel like if they ever won and you're covering the game, in the same way that I think about if I was an NFL writer and I was covering the New York Jets in the Super Bowl and in my lifetime got to see them win, like, I would not be able to be professional about that. There's a very good chance I might have my face painted green in the press box at the Super Bowl. So I completely understand the vibe. I completely understand that. And I wouldn't think twice if I saw, you know, a grown man colleague of mine openly weeping because the Leafs finally won in his lifetime.
They basically do right now. Like, after having covered the Leafs in Tampa, like, in the playoffs 2 years ago, I remember being like, okay, so, like, everyone here is obviously like, just they're like team media right now. Right. Like, and I get it. It's a different beast. You are right. Things seem to have changed in the last couple of years. I don't know who started it. I don't know what happened, but it's kind of like the Megyn Kelly effect where you can
That's right.
You can come to your own conclusions about that analogy, where, you can still be a journalist, quote unquote, and support somebody or something. All right, let's get back to the Leafs. And you've watched a lot of teams this year. You've been covering all different teams. When you look at the Leafs, what's maybe something that stands out about them that gives them an edge, and then maybe what's something that you feel is a bit of an Achilles heel?
It's the Craig Berube effect, you know, like having him behind the bench. I feel like I felt like when he was hired, it was overstated that having somebody that won and having somebody with this comportment would have a transformative effect on the team. But honestly, like, the way that they've played through adversity this year is the calling card of Craig Berube. I mean, the Blues won the Cup with him behind the bench, just being like, no matter what calamity they faced in that run to the Cup, just forget it, like, move on. Like, tomorrow we never talk about it again. And so that the lack of like snowballing for the Leafs, the lack of falling apart when certain key players haven't been in the lineup, or when they've been in the lineup, they haven't necessarily played to their standards. To me, is kind of a signature Craig Berube team. The fact that they've been able to thrive like this and push towards a division title. I guess for me, like I'm still trying to navigate what the goaltending is going to look like in the playoffs. There are obviously some nights when Stolarz looks incredible. There are some nights when Wall looks incredible. Neither of them have carried the ball in the playoffs for 4 rounds or 3 rounds or a round. Well, I guess Wall has for a round. But I mean, I came into the season very optimistic about that goaltending battery as being maybe they figured out a solution to what had in the past been an Achilles heel for them. And so there's definitely some proof of concept with those guys that they found a little something there, but you still don't know how that's going to manifest in a playoff series. And that goes for any goalie. I mean, like everybody's like having, etching the Stanley Cup for the Colorado Avalanche since the trade deadline. And we don't know what Mackenzie Blackwood looks like after 3 rounds of the playoffs. I mean, none of us do. So they're not alone in that, but I'm that's what I'm probably most curious about right now for them as a playoff contender.
Right, especially after Stolar's injury coming back, trying to figure out whose net is this. And, we assume that Berube knows who's going to be probably his game 1 starter, but that could change. And he's not going to tell anyone or anything because it's Toronto. And it's also, again, as the wind blows, things can change. We know Stolarz is getting the start against Florida on Wednesday night. So what kind of emphasis, like where is your emphasis on watching this game tonight against Florida to see maybe matchups or see where the Leafs, how the Leafs deal with, what is it, maybe like Florida's neutral zone pressure, like whatever it is, knowing also though that Florida is on the second game of a back-to-back.
Yeah, that's part of it too, is like, they're going to catch them at the right time. But whenever you play the Panthers, there's only one thing to look at, which is how you survive the meat grinder. I mean, this is a physical team. It's a team that agitates. It's a team that only knows how to play one way, and that is with blunt force. And so when you match up against them in the regular season or the playoffs, the thing I'm most interested in is how do you handle the physical toll, and how do you level the playing field by dishing out your own physicality. I mean, it's a title fight every time you play the Panthers, and that's what makes it really fun to watch them play.
Right, and Marchand will be back, and you imagine he's just going to be an absolute shit disturber out there, as he usually is. But especially again now, just the heightened. I don't know. There's just like a lot of stuff in the mix. So then, who on the Leafs can match that?
Oh, I mean, it's a group effort is probably my best answer. I mean, that's part of being the Leafs right now, is that they've tried to do the thing where you add that DNA to your mix, whether it was Tanev or Domi or whomever. And they've done that in the past too, like importing toughness. And to me, the thing that makes the Panthers such a fascinating team is that they never have to import that personality or that DNA. Their core is that. At the end of the day, it's Bennett, it's Barkov, it's Tkachuk when he's healthy. Now it's Marchand. It's what they have on the blue line. That's the Panthers. And so I've always found it interesting when teams are criticized for maybe not being tough enough in the playoffs, or can't handle the physical grind of contention. That they always have to kind of go outside to bring that stuff in. The Panthers are that. And for me, the interesting thing is, like, can the Leafs top to bottom be that type of team?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And when you mention Tkachuk and then also Aaron Ekblad and those guys, Ekblad coming back within the playoffs, like whatever, beginning of the playoffs?
I think it's like game 3 he's eligible to come back, yeah.
So in the first round, and then Tkachuk is imminently going to be playing soon, I imagine. I don't know. But like having those guys kind of come back right around the time of the playoffs, does it kind of feel like a guy coming off of long-term IR where it's like an extra added like power up that you didn't have before? Or are they still going to have a bit of rust after being off?
Well, in Ekblad's case, he should be all right. I mean, he's out for a non-injury reason. The Tkachuk thing's interesting because Paul Maurice, their head coach, mentioned the other day that depending on when the playoffs start for the Panthers, could determine when Matthew Tkachuk comes back to the lineup, which tells you that they at least expect there to be a little bit of an after effect in his preparation and rehab from the injury. That could carry over to the playoffs. And, as we saw in Four Nations, a Matthew Tkachuk in a diminished capacity is only going to be as good as he can be. He's not going to be Matthew Tkachuk. So that's a bit of intrigue for them. But ultimately, it's the same thing that we've seen with Vegas. It's the thing that we've seen with Tampa. It's the thing that we've seen over and over again with players that aren't there on the last day of the regular season that all of a sudden are there for game one of the playoffs. There's always a little rust to begin with. And then, as the playoffs go on, you just get, some people get mad about the fact that they were able to stash those players away on LTIR, and then all of a sudden they're healthy enough to play in a playoff series.
Okay, speaking of guys that have really shined this year, we'd be remiss not to mention just John Tavares, second star of the month for the NHL. We've joked about the amulet being a big reason why this has happened, but he's on pace to, have a potential 40-goal season. Yeah. And I mean, after everything he's kind of been through and a lot of criticism about him in the last couple of years, the captaincy being taken away. But like when you see a guy kind of have a year like that compared to maybe even other guys that are around that age or in that area, like, what do you think happens with him going forward, like with the Leafs? I know that they've obviously he's not going to get an $11 million contract, but like, what do you think? Do you think he can keep this kind of thing up, or is it just like this one random year?
Well, there's a couple ways to look at that, and all of it leads back to a contract. So, I mean, I think he's been fine in Toronto, but he's not been fine to the level of his cap hit. And that's really been the issue with Tavares, is that when you look at how much money he's making and you think about the other holes on this roster, inevitably it's going to come back to they're overpaying a guy for the numbers that he's putting up, even if the numbers are okay. He's not been a disaster by any stretch. The numbers he's putting up this season are not coincidentally in a contract year, which is something that you always have to take into account when you see a guy pop off like this, is that, time and again in the NHL, the singing for your supper, offensive explosion in a contract year is something we see annually. So you don't want to overcompensate for that. That being said, it's clear he wants to stay. And I think they've indicated that they'd like him to stay. But ultimately, like you said, it's going to have to be at an agreeable price point. And so we come back to the little kid in the Leafs pajamas. What price do you put on your happiness, your contentment, your being a Leaf, versus probably being able to make a good chunk of change on the open market, considering the position he plays and the prestige that he has. I mean, like, couldn't you see Chicago throwing money at him to center Bedard or to play on a power play with Bedard? Like, you could probably see that happening. So we'll see what happens, but ultimately I think it's going to be contingent on where Tavares wants to see himself in the next couple of years.
I like how you used happy and contentment in the same sentence as being a Leaf, because it just reminded me back to Brian McCabe recently talking about the fact that like when he'd scored the own goal that will go down in history in my mind, and he was like, I have to leave. Like, we have to get out of town. Like, I'm getting death threats. This is not a good place. I mean, that it's tough for if you suck on the Leafs, or if you make a mistake, or if you're even just mediocre. That's a tough life to live.
It is, but I mean, and again, it is also weird to talk about, happiness and contentment with someone like Tavares, who I think is a tough guy to read emotionally sometimes.
Yeah, he's real
but I mean, it's more about, you're home, and that's what brought him there to begin with. And at his age and at this stage in his career, he'd probably be happy enough to stay if he can.
Right. And as the older you get, it's harder to move. That's my own personal perspective as I sit here in this like studio apartment in New York City that I just like won't leave ever. We're still working from home for the last 5 years. Okay, so we talk so much about the fact that like getting that first place in the Atlantic Division is so big. But what if they don't get it? like what kind of mental stress and then also fortitude is needed to be able to kind of be like, okay, we're going to play Tampa?
Well, I mean, I feel like they've had some success against Tampa, so I mean that might be a little bit of a different vibe. But ultimately, they know their lot in life. Like they know that if they don't get first place, they're going to have to play Kucherov and Point and Gensel and a revitalized Vasilevsky, who's looking very much like the playoff Vasilevsky that might have been the best postseason goalie we've had since Brodeur, based on the numbers. Or they know they're going to have to play the defending Stanley Cup champions who are getting healthy at the right time. I mean,
it's like choose your own adventure, and both of them are bad.
I've said this for a while that, like, the greatest argument against the current playoff format is probably the Leafs, because the idea that almost the entirety of the Austin Matthews era has been spent being in the same division where you're forced to play a quasi-dynastic Boston team, or a quasi-dynastic Tampa team, or now a Florida team that is working on its third straight trip to the Stanley Cup final. Like, you talk about, like you can criticize the Leafs all you want for their playoff disappointment. If you're being a realist, nobody's been in this spot. Like nobody in the league has had to go. Maybe the LA Kings having to see McDavid in the first round for like 3 or 4 straight seasons. Maybe they've got beef too because of the playoff format. But as far as Toronto goes, like it just, some of it's bad luck. Some of it's you were born in the wrong time. If you're the Austin Matthews Leafs and having to play all of these incredible hockey teams that are collecting Stanley Cups in the last decade, that's why as much as people lose their minds every time the Leafs leave the playoffs before playing in a conference final, I sometimes just have to be a realist and be like, it's not so much them sometimes, it's who they're playing. And who they're playing is incredibly good. Yeah,
and then sometimes with those really great teams, then they just get like a bounce here or there. Or obviously last year we saw Nylander was sick, Matthews was sick, like there was all these like weird things that happened. So
you go back to the Kadri suspensions against Boston and that kind of stuff too happening and throwing everything off. I mean, there's a lot of that. And so the counter argument I have time for, which is that eventually champions do have to beat good teams to win a championship. And I think back to the Capitals Cup when they finally broke through with Ovechkin. They beat Pittsburgh for the first time with Ovechkin to go on to then win the cup. And it was cathartic. And it was that moment when you said to yourself, it's probably going to happen now that they've gotten past their tormentors. And so I do have time for the counter argument, which is that you can't cry about your seeding or how good your division is. Eventually you have to beat one of those teams and advance. But again, those are really good teams.
But those are very good teams. And I do miss, I've said it before, I miss the 1 through 8. I just would like to see something a little different. I mean, the rivalries are good, but they're a little repetitive. A little. I mean, gosh, it's like sometimes I don't even know what year it is because I'm like, wait, when they played Tampa, then they played Tampa, then they played Florida, they played Boston.
Kings and Oilers, Kings and Oilers, Kings and Oilers.
Yeah, Kings and Oilers. Like how many times?
Yeah.
It's almost, honestly, it's like, as I mentioned before, just like having work from home during the pandemic, it's like, it feels like those years where we all just like don't really know what year it was and everything just sort of meshed together. Like that's kind of like how the playoffs for like the NHL has felt in the last couple of years. Like, wait, what year was that happened?
Yeah, for sure.
Because they're all the same.
The NHL's counter argument on that, and again, I have time for this one too, is they created this format, this wild card format, to force rivalry series early in the playoffs when there's the most attention on the Stanley Cup playoffs.
True.
And so the idea that you and I are both like, let's go 1 through 8, and maybe the numbers would bear out anyway in a 1 through 8. I haven't checked what those seedings would be, but in the current format, we could right now mathematically get the Battle of Ontario, the Battle of Florida, Dallas and Colorado in the first round. And it's hard to argue against.
I mean, they're great. It's just like you're going to see good teams go out in the first round, which sucks because it's like these teams could at least advance. Okay, very quickly, you mentioned Ovechkin. He has 4 goals left, and 8 games left. Does he do it, and when?
So according to ESPN Stats and Info, I'll give you the latest that I have here. Which is that if he's on his current goal pace, which is 0.66 goals per game, He'll break it April 15th on the road against the Islanders. His career pace, same deal, April 15th against the Islanders. His last 5 seasons average pace, then he will break it the last game of the season against Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh, which obviously is the one that we all would love to see. I mean, the inherent drama of Ovechkin coming into that game with a chance to break Gretzky's record against his arch rivals would be just hockey drama at its greatest. But
would you like that? Would you prefer that?
Everyone would prefer that, I think. But we ain't gonna get it. I mean, I feel like the carrot's in front of him now. I mean, the scenario that played out in Boston the other night, where Ovechkin scores early and then we're all waiting for him to get the empty netter at the end. Like, you could easily see that situation playing out, 3 more times before he plays Sid.
I know.
So I think he'll break it before April 15th. I definitely think he'll break it before the end of the season.
What if he doesn't break it?
Well, then the opening game of next season becomes like
it's like the resets. You have to start back.
You get an entire summer of hype ahead of it too. I mean, it'll be I mean, like, if he comes into next season tied with Gretzky, like, opening night becomes, put that thing on pay-per-view, right? Like,
True.
Like, Gretzky's there, Bettman's there, like, they're all there, and
should
so.
Be the scheduler of the league scheduler right here, Craig Wyshynski, knowing which games to circle on your calendar and which ones not to. Greg, thank you so much for joining us here on Toronto Sports Rush. We'll have to see if your and my media colleagues will be hoping for rings. How many of them do you think are going to try to see if they could get a ring if the Leafs win the cup?
Oh, well, there's a difference between getting a ring and wearing a ring. None of them will wear the ring because they are, of course, impartial journalists, but they'll all maybe inquire about getting one.
Because they'll be like, but we're like following, we're like beat writers, or we're like broadcasters.
There's like 3 I could think of right now.
I mean, I would ask for one just to
audacity.
See.
Okay, 4.
Like test
four,
the waters. No, not here. Like, if I was Mark Masters or Kyle Bogaskis or, whomever, even like Sean McKenzie, although he would be like not necessarily like a Leafs guy, I would ask, what's the point in not harm in asking if you can get a ring?
The question for me, more importantly, is will the happy tears of Toronto-based journalists literally melt the ice while we're out there after the game interviewing the Leafs after they win the cup? Will the tears just melt the ice to the point where we're just standing on rubber and concrete because there's so many happy tears being shed by our Toronto media friends?
I want to be out there just filming the media. Like I want to interview the media and get just all of their reactions, because I did do that in Colorado. I got a lot of the Colorado people and how emotional they were. And I was like, okay, this is real.
When they won with McKinnon, like that year? Because there was definitely a guy who no longer works in the Colorado media who paraded the cup down the hall while smoking a cigar after the game. I mean, and took pictures with it. You can probably still find the pictures. He no longer works in Denver media. Maybe that's why. Maybe
he's like, I'm done. He's like,
he's on his way out. Yeah. Anyway, but like that dude definitely celebrated with the cup.
There's going to be if the Leafs happen to even get that far, there's going to be a lot of people who will not be likely back on the roster for the impartial journalism. But if everyone does it together, if we all agree to meet at the same spot and we all do it, then you never know. Right. Okay, Greg, thank you so much for joining us here. Go catch up on what Gary Bettman was saying about the new TV rights deal, which is going down in Canada. And we'll look forward to watching you in the playoffs and on ESPN, and continue doing awesome work, writing, tweeting, everything. You make hockey a better sport and a better place. So thank you.
Well, as do you, Julie, and thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.